Welcome to Upfront. I'm Tara Keating with Mayor Ryan Windsor of Central Saanich. Now, you may not know this, but the mayor is a local farmer. We'll talk about more about that later. Welcome, Mayor Windsor.
Thank you, Tara.
Thank you for being here. Now we're going to get into right with the citizen questions. Shaw TV regularly accepts questions from social media, so we're going to get right into that. And we do have a question from citizen Derek. Why does Mayor Windsor claim that there is no support for Woodwind Farms when we have witnessed literally hundreds of volunteers come out from local community to donate their time and effort to work as volunteers on the farm, including many local businesses donating products and services?
Indeed, I think what's important to focus on with Woodwind Farm is that it is a land use question, first and foremost. And the operation, while laudable, certainly, and many members of council, both past and present, have pointed out that the efforts are certainly laudable with respect to the goals of helping homeless and disadvantaged youth and adults by bringing them out to a therapeutic farm. But from our perspective in the district of Central Saanich, it's important that the therapeutic aspect is supportive of the farming aspect for which the land is dedicated. When we talk about the agricultural land reserve, we have an institution which is province-wide. Certainly Central Saanich has a large amount of land in that base, and we try to ensure that the agricultural land is used for its purposes. And so what the district of Central Saanich has actually done with the latest application is refer it to the Agricultural Land Commission for a determination as to whether or not what is ultimately proposed can fit within the mandate that the Agricultural Land Commission sees for the reserve.
And I can imagine being mindful of the bylaws and policy. I mean, it's a great thing to have, house the homeless, but there's all these bylaws and policies that take time. Now we have another question from another citizen, Anne, and it's to do with the Woodwind Farms. And she wants to know, when will zoning be changed to allow Woodwind Farms to house more people who are being helped to move through recovery from drugs and alcohol? As we know, that is a hot topic.
Again, going back to my reference in the previous answer, we have referred this to the Agricultural Land Commission. It is really up to the commission to determine first and foremost with this particular zone, because the province has regulation which supersede our local bylaws with respect to land use. Mm-hmm. And so we first require the commission to weigh in on this and then determine if in fact what they're proposing then complies with our own local bylaws. And that's not unique to the operation at Woodwind Farm. Everyone in the district is expected to comply with local bylaws. And obviously the more serious an infraction against those bylaws are, the more impetus there is for the district to take action with respect to enforcing the bylaws, whether it be on Woodwind or any other farm property, or certainly any other business property or residential property in the district.
I'm thinking also because of the fentanyl crisis that a lot of people are like, oh goodness, let's speed up the process because we have this crisis and this looks like a great location, it's therapeutic and everything. So, but still, there's still policy in the bylaws and everything that you just said. Okay, so Mayor Windsor, another question from Chris is, how can we keep the Island View Beach area as an off-leash area for dogs?
Certainly, the District of Central Saanich obviously has an interest in the Island View Beach Regional Park, being that we own a section at the south end of the park, and we have to reconcile and balance the needs of the park users in our section of the park, ultimately with the rest of the park, which is a regional park owned and operated by the Capital Regional District. It's certainly been my contention all along as the voice of Central Saanich to say that we need a balanced approach which allows park users, both human and non-human, so it could be dogs, it could be wildlife, a balanced ability to use and enjoy the park from the human perspective, and also for nature to exist in the park as it always has to some extent. It needs to probably be restored. And there is, I would suggest, a difference of opinion between the various stakeholders, which is very strong at the moment. And it's our job as regional and local decision makers to try and find a harmonious balance which takes into consideration all aspects of park use, park enjoyment, and also the natural ecology of the park.
Could you have like fencing? Could you do the fencing and just have signage and stuff? Because there's no signage or anything. So people that I would think would be mindful because of the brant geese and the migration of the birds and whatnot, if people knew, because I don't think a lot of the public knows about this. So would that be something that Central Saanich would be in charge of, or would that be a CRD topic? Would it be their responsibility?
Yeah, so when the question relates to the regional park, then the CRD is the ultimate decision maker, and that involves the Regional Parks Committee, which is made up of some 11 members of the CRD board, of which I'm one. And certainly we have talked about fencing, although we want to minimize fencing because it can be disruptive to any number of uses, including the ecological uses. So one has to find the appropriate level of fencing that doesn't interfere potentially with the natural ecology and the wildlife that come and use the park on their migratory routes. As well as finding a balance that allows existing park users, both those with disabilities, as well as dog owners and non-dog owners who wish to use the park for recreation and respite and sort of a natural rejuvenation by enjoying the seaside and the rest of the park.
Definitely a delicate dance there. Thank you, Mayor Windsor. We're going to take a break now. We'll be right back. We are back, and we are going to go into that hot issue of affordable housing. What is the Central Saanich approach to the affordable housing issue?
That's a great question, Tara. The district obviously relies on applications first and foremost to address housing needs. That means working with both the for-profit development community as well as the not-for-profit development community. We have seen with the uptick in the economy a great interest in building, especially around multifamily, from the development community broadly. And we're very fortunate in the last year to have worked through several applications, put them through the process of public hearing for both for-profit and not-for-profit. Touching on the for-profit, last night we gave approval to a multifamily development on the lands of the Marigold Nursery. It's about 8 acres. And this will add about 230 to 240 units in a phased development to the district of Central Saanich, which will support everything from seniors who wish to age in place to young families looking to break into the market who can't quite afford a single-family detached home. We also have seen a lot of pressure in the workforce housing category. We have a lot of manufacturing, both here on Keating Crossroad, where this fire hall is, as well as around the airport lands and even some in Sydney. And what we see, again, it could be workers who are single or married without children, or even some with children, who would like to live closer to where they work. And the Greater Victoria Housing Society last year, in partnership with a for-profit developer, came forward with a proposal in Brentwood Bay, which the district has now approved, for 40 units of workforce housing that are rental. And that will be kept affordable in perpetuity by covenant as part of the overall approval for the the rezoning. So those are some examples, and we expect to see more. We've got examples around one proposal which is still in the process where live work is proposed. And the idea is therefore you're buying a unit which allows you to set up certain businesses in the front of your unit and have a residence in the rear of the unit.
Now, you said something interesting, not-for-profit. I've never heard of not-for-profit because I always think people are in for-profit when they develop housing. What does that look like, not-for-profit?
Well, essentially, the Greater Victoria Housing Society, there's the Greater Victoria Rental Housing Society are set up as a not-for-profit societies. They are eligible to receive government grants, for instance. The project in Brentwood received, I believe, $3 million from the province to support housing which is accessible to the lower end of the spectrum. Could be towards social housing, supportive housing, drug rehabilitation, mental health, or it could be around workforce. All those categories exist and are eligible for provincial funding and sometimes federal funding, but there needs to be a mechanism to receive those funds. And sometimes the municipal government may be the appropriate authority, and sometimes a society is more the appropriate authority. And then, of course, one has to look at, if you're looking at social housing, which is supportive of mental health, do the support services for mental health exist in the community? And in Victoria, for instance, we see a lot of support. Out here on the peninsula, less so. Population is lower, and so it's harder to maintain those facilities. So we also contribute into the Regional Housing Trust Fund, which is designed to build some of those types of housing from a regional perspective. So, you know, you may find yourself in Central Saanich falling on hard times, and because we contribute regionally, you know, the supportive housing may be 20 minutes down the road in Victoria, for instance, but at least we're contributing to those options.
Nice. And the market cannot dictate, because I know the market dictates the cost of housing, and when you're talking about that, the market cannot dictate the cost of housing in that regard? That's
precisely right. So when we approved the Greater Victoria Housing Society's proposal, there are a number of conditions on that approval which exist in perpetuity to keep those units affordable, because the temptation might be to see them revert after a certain amount of time to for-profit, could be sold as condos, and we are mindful of that, and so we put these restrictions in place with the agreement of the developer. In this case, that's what they were proposing, and so the mechanism exists should the Greater Victoria Housing Society ultimately have to transfer that asset. The restrictions would carry with the asset on title in perpetuity.
Perfect. So another hot issue is the Keating crossing, and the increasing traffic to Keating Industrial Park is a matter of frustration for a lot of citizens. It's also a provincial election topic as well. I did go to a round table, and that was discussed as well. So what are your thoughts on that?
This has been an issue for a long time. I've spoken to residents who did business on Keating Crossroad in the early days. In 1975, it was an election issue between the then NDP, who were governing from 1972 on, and the Social Credit, who were looking to get back into power. And there were promises made back in the 70s. What we've seen is considerable growth as the Keating area has been designated in the regional growth strategy as a place for commercial industrial activity. That land base is limited in Greater Victoria, and so this is, I believe, 16 to 18% of the commercial industrial land in Victoria is located on Keating Crossroads. So from an economic perspective, very significant. From a job creation perspective, very significant. But also, we don't just look at it from an economic perspective, as important as it is to have good access for the economy that's taking place on Keating. It's also safety. If you are looking to access the Pat Bay Highway to go north, as we expect many are, because the airport and the main ferry terminal are located to the north of us, we have trucks and a lot of vehicle traffic migrating by Keating Elementary School on Central Saanich Road in order to access the Pat Bay Highway. And since I was elected, I have pointed out on numerous occasions that this is a concern. And I don't want to play politics. I don't want to depend on one person being elected over another in order to get that. I need the government to recognize that this is both an economically important issue in the region because of the amount of land that's contributed, as well as a safety issue for the growing number of students who are enrolled at Keating Elementary, the safety issue around that. So it is something that we are championing, and I believe we need to get this done.
Perfect, good. Let's talk about the Central Saanich Community Plan. Now, I know there's a lot to be unpackaged there, so can you just give us some highlights on that plan?
Certainly. The plan recognizes that we are both an agricultural community with 60% of our land in the agricultural land reserve, as well as an economic hub. On the peninsula, we see a lot of manufacturing. There's a lot of cross or business-to-business relationships going on between Keating and the manufacturers located both in North Saanich and Sydney. And so the plan attempts to recognize the balance that exists between an agricultural community and one that has urban centers as well. We have in the regional context statement, we have the urban containment boundary, which designates areas for either residential or commercial purposes. We see Tanner Ridge, Saanichton, and Brentwood Bay as our residential areas, and Keating as our commercial area. And so the document goes back and forth in trying to create a sustainable community with those factors recognized.
And just quickly before we're on break, what's happening in the area of economic development?
Well, there's a lot of exciting stuff happening on the economic development file. We have joined the South Island Prosperity Project, and we have set up an economic development committee locally. In addition, we are working on a Keating revitalization plan. Council selected a medium growth scenario for Keating, which obviously is dependent on the interchange we talked about, which will create an additional 3,400 jobs over the next 20 to 25 years. And we will see obviously that balanced with growth and maintaining the agricultural land base, which is also an important part of our economy, has been for a long time. We see farming businesses set up as long established, like the Mitchell Farms, Longview Farms, Sluggett, supplying into the regional food supply.
Perfect. Exciting times ahead for sure. We're just going to go on a break and we'll be right back with Mayor Windsor. And we are back with Mayor Windsor. So let's talk about some major areas of progress since your election. I know there's lots of them, but let's talk about two. What are two things that you have, since the election, that you have done, your achievements?
Well, I think the first area I'd like to focus on is really around finance and the management of our infrastructure locally. We have taken on some debt to obviously pay for this fire hall. We needed this building. Once it was settled and built, we took on long-term debt. And one of the things that we recognize is while we have the benefit of low interest rates presently, we can borrow for a period of 10 years, and then we need to renew our borrowing agreement with something called the Municipal Finance Authority. We don't know what the interest rates are going to be in 10 years. We have a 25-year payback amortization on this building. And I really wanted to make sure that in managing our infrastructure, we weren't facing debt past a certain point. And Council agreed at a motion that was made 2 years ago, that we would take additional resources and set them aside to pay this building off in 10 years.
Oh, nice.
Which will save a significant amount of interest in the last 15 years.
And it's beautiful. Thank you for suggesting this place for the interview. It's a beautiful building.
I have to say I love this building.
Now let's talk a little bit of your story because everyone likes to hear about a story. You moved from Vancouver. You have you have a little family as well. You started a local winery. And then you ran for municipal politics. What were the issues? What was the why that you got involved with politics?
Well, in the early sort of involvement, there were some developments that I was concerned about, much the community was concerned about, and it sort of drew me in. I had been politically active for a long time, but more focused on higher level policy at the provincial and federal level. But local government is, in fact, what affects most people on a day-to-day basis. And once I learned that, it was very difficult not to stay involved and really take an interest in how the community grows, how it progresses, and what shape it takes and how sustainable it is in the long term. So when the opportunity came in 2011 to run, I did. I was unsuccessful. And 18 months later, there was a by-election, and I'd learned a lot from my first experience. And was successful in the by-election, and 18 months after that was successful in becoming the mayor.
Wow, well done. So let's talk a little bit about local farming, because you are a farmer. Your story about that, because you came here and you started your winery as well.
Yeah, so this was a family business, and it started out really as a vineyard, grew into a winery, and has since grown into a craft distillery. But our goal, obviously, is to grow as much as we can locally.
Yes.
The rules allow us to buy from anywhere in BC in a lot of cases, but from a sustainability perspective, really from the environmental perspective, transporting stuff from the Peace River is pretty climate intensive still, and trucks and all that. So growing locally is where we wanted to focus, and so we've acquired some additional lands, and farming is a wonderful balance with being the mayor.
And we certainly enjoy your wine. And we're gonna go on another break and we'll be right back. And we are back, and we're going to talk about the derelict boat situation, because that is another issue in Central Saanich. So how is that going?
Well, it adds a lot of complexity to have two coastlines in addition to all the other challenges we have in Central Saanich, but it's one that we were willing to rise to on this council. We see a lot of marine pollution, some real problems with the federal government not having exempted, or rather included, the inlet in the no discharge regulations. There's been a fight for that for a long time, with the pleasure craft being able to discharge marine sewage into an environment which has a lot of history with our local First Nations fishing in the inlet for centuries, if not millennia. And its environment is such that it only flushes once a year because of a sill at the north end. So we are looking to regulate that in partnership with the provincial and federal governments, really to control vessels which tend to get passed down because it's an easier way of disposing of them than taking them out and taking them apart. They tend to wind up in secluded areas like the Saanich Inlet because it's a safe harbor. And so in the inaction from the federal and provincial government, we have taken up and are championing the cause, but we want them to come back to the table.
Perfect. Yeah, I know that's a tricky, difficult issue for sure. So let's talk about the ALR, because that is a huge percentage here in Central Saanich. And I love that you, as a mayor, you're also a farmer. So in terms of protection of farmland, let's talk about that.
I take a lot of guidance from the farmers who have been here for a century and a half, in some cases now, who know that farming is a business. Farmers have to be able to produce a marketable crop that someone will buy locally, obviously would be the first preference, And we are taking steps in the municipality to support the farmers by giving them the ability to sit on the Agricultural Advisory Committee as well as the Peninsula and Area Agricultural Committee. Both are supported by the District of Central Saanich with liaison, some financial resources. But really we want to make sure that farmers have the ability to operate their businesses in a sustainable way. And that's the lesson I've taken from them. I've tried to apply to my own farm as a relatively new person to the field of farming and agriculture. I have a great interest, but I'm learning all the time from the farmers here, both on a personal level with my business and on a level with the municipality and what role it plays in making sure that farming is economically viable in this area.
Perfect. And I'm just wondering, as mayor and council, have you experienced any people taking advantage of ALR where they can, build a house, which is a little, because it is cheaper to build houses on ALR property, but then not actually having a farm? Has that ever been an issue or not on Central Saanich?
Certainly, part of it is that you can reserve the land for farming purposes, but you can't necessarily force people to farm. And so it is a constant challenge where some land gets bought up, smaller pieces can get bought up, and the impetus isn't there to grow a crop. It could be very economically hard to grow a crop that is meaningful on smaller land. But there are ways to make it viable, and so the sharing of knowledge is really important. And making sure, again, that the bylaws that apply to farmland on the local level are enforced so that people don't view the agricultural land reserve as something it is not. It is primarily, obviously, for agricultural purposes and does allow for a homestead on the site for a person to be able to farm that land.
Perfect. And before we close here, just what are you looking forward in the future? What are some future goals?
Well, I'm looking forward to continuing to make the community a balanced and viable but sustainable community which respects the environment, acknowledges and addresses climate change, makes farming economically sustainable, and supports the appropriate type of housing for the community. There are types of housing which might not work here, but then we revert to our regional approach, and playing as part of the region is also important because we don't exist in isolation. We have to recognize the communities and the services that exist around us and try and make those a part of our community even more than they already are.
Oh, great, wonderful. Well, thank you, Mayor Windsor. We've certainly learned a lot about Central Saanich, and thank you for being part of our show. And we look forward to seeing you next month on Upfront.